Right, so next up in our series, video number 3, we're going to be talking about get and getAll. So how I can find an individual object within our store, or how I can get a whole collection of records, so multiple matches. All right, so what we've got right now is a form, and I do have a list here. It's just an empty list down below the form. The add operation is working, so if we look inside of our store, we can see that we have added a couple of records inside of here. We could add a few more, and then what I want to do is every time I save this, every time I add something new, I want to update the web page to show in my list all of the records that I've got inside of here. So every one of these objects, I'm going to write out, let's say we're going to write out the name and maybe the age or the name and the country, just picking a couple of records. And then I'm also going to take the ID and save that as a data property in the HTML. So I'm going to write out some of the properties from our object inside of list items. So let's jump into our code and do that. So right now we've got the add button. The event listener in our JavaScript is listening for submit. So really any one of these buttons is going to trigger it right now. But for the moment, we're going to say click on the add button. And this is the list down here, this W list. This is where we're going to put the list items. So our submit function, when we click on the submit button, we gather all the data from the form, we build our object, and we start up our transaction. We have a function that runs when the transaction is complete. So after we've inserted the object into the store, and right here, you can see I've got a transaction object store. We're looking at the whiskey store, and we're going to add this new object that we created right here, whiskey, into there. So we've got that working. The success and error for the request, this is the request to do the insert or add. These are working, but we're just using them right now to write out messages. When the success happens, it's important to remember with a transaction, you could have multiple things going on. This is telling me that this one was a success. After this happens, we're going to move on to the next request inside the transaction. Or if it's the final one, we go on to commit the transaction, and that actually happens automatically. So this transaction on complete, this means the transaction is done. The transaction has been committed. There is a transaction commit method. So, I mean, I could go inside of here and say tx.commit, call the method, but we don't really need to do that because it's an automatic commit. As soon as the last request for the transaction is complete, it's done. The complete event is going to happen, and we're going to call a function to clear the form out, because after you fill out a form and you click submit, you don't want to leave the old data in the form. So we're going to call that method, which I added here before I started the video. Right now it's just a simple thing to reset the form. Prevent default is going to stop the form from actually submitting and the page from reloading. I do that because I'm also going to call this when the person clicks on the submit button. This one right here, the btn clear. So I'm going to add that inside of here. I'll put it down here right next to it. There we go. So I'm going to call this function, and if it's called this way with the click, it's going to do the same thing, but we're going to prevent default to stop the form from submitting. All right, so that's working. And now the build list, this is the other function that we're going to call from up here. So clear form will empty out the form, and then build list, what we want to do is we want to write out all the objects that we have inside of our store. Okay, first step, whenever you're going to be building anything new in the HTML, first step is always get rid of the old stuff. So I'm going to create a variable called list and point it at that W list. And we'll set its inner HTML. There we go. So if something does go wrong, this is the message that's going to be showing if there's a delay or if something's going wrong. So we'll just keep that in mind. Right now, if I run this, let's say we add something in. There we go, we have the 3 items. And down here it says loading. So this was being called. The transaction was completed. This happened. Great. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to go and get those records. So, just like anything else you would do with the database, we have to start with the transaction. So we're going to call our make transaction. And what we're going to pass in is the name of our store and what mode. Now I could say read-write, but since I'm only going to be reading the data, I will set the mode to read-only. There we are. And I will add my onComplete function here. The onError is inside this function, but the onComplete, because I'm likely going to do something custom when this is finished. Very often with your transaction, you do something custom. All right, so now we need our object store so we can create our request. Same as this for all of our requests that we make to a document or to a IndexedDB. And we're going to make it a request. So I'm calling this getRec. Could be getRequest, could be request, whatever you want to call the variable, as long as you indicate in some way that it is a request that you're making to do this. Now, this is the command right here, getAll, store.getAll. This is going to find for me all of the records, and it will return an array. We can optionally pass in a key or a key range, either one right inside of here. So we can pass in a key and say, get me all the records that match this key, which doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about how a key is supposed to be something unique. But key range, yeah, I could provide a range of values, and anything that matches that range of values, it's going to get those records, those objects coming back. And then we have our handlers. So the success and the error handler. Okay, now the success. When the success happens, this means that I have fetched all the data. I could, at this point, because I do have the result coming back, I can, inside of here, deal with everything that worked in the request, or we could come up here inside the complete. Really, we can do this at any point, after the whole transaction is complete or after the request was successful. We can do it in another place. So here, this request is the same thing as getRec. So I could use this variable getRec, and it would be the same thing as target. So request is the same thing as getRec, which is the same thing as our event.target. So any one of those three you can use at this point. I like to personally create a new variable to hold on to this reference inside of here, just to keep things a little bit clear for myself. Okay, so this request object, we can take a look at that. Just to see what we're getting back here. So we'll save that, we'll come back, we'll add another record. There we go. We've added that final record in there. So let's come back to the console, and here is our request. So it's an IndexedDB request object. That's what came back. And inside of there, if we look, so inside of request, we have a property called result. So our request variable, request.result, this is the array. And you can see there's 4 things here. The length is 4. This is all of our objects. So that's what we're going to loop through to create our new content. So request.result. So I'm going to say here, I've already set my inner HTML to this. Now I'm going to set it to something new. Request.result. Now, if I just did that, what I'm saying is put the contents of inner HTML equal to an array, which doesn't make any sense. But I can call the map function, which is going to return a brand new array. Now, my new array could be just a series of pieces of HTML. And at the end of that, I'm going to say join. I can join it with an empty string, or to make the syntax a little bit easier to read, I can join it with a new line character. So inside of here is going to be an array of 4 pieces of HTML, and I'm joining them all together with new line characters, so they're going to be written out in the source of the page as 4 separate lines. But this big string is going to be what's assigned to inner HTML. Okay, so each one of these objects, or you want to call it whiskey, whatever it is that you want to use as the name for your variable, inside of here, what do we want to return for each one of them? Well, I'm going to have a list item. That's what each one of these things in my new array that I'm building is going to be, a list item. Inside of there, you know, if you want to do some formatting, create a span just to separate the 2 pieces of information. And this is a template string, so I'm going to have 3 pieces of information. There we go. I'm going to have my ID, my name, and then some other piece of information that I choose. And each one of these, this is the object from right here. This is the object that comes back from the result array. And what do I want to get? I want to get the ID property. And here, I want to get the name property. And here could be the country, could be the age, whichever. Or you can put them both in there if you want. But there we go. This gives me now all the data. So I would have to, at this point, add something new. And there we have it. So we have here name, age, name, age, name, age, name, age, name, age. But if I look, if I inspect that, we can see the data key or data ID or whatever you want to call this property. Those are the IDs from our database. And then here's the name, and then here's the other string. So we have all this information coming directly from the database. Something that is lacking on our page, though, is when it loads, if I hit refresh, my list is now empty because it's only being written when I click on the add button. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this build list function that we just finished. We're going to call that right here at the start. When we have success for opening our database, that's when we're going to call build list. So we're going to make this run as soon as the page loads. There we go. Now we have everything being loaded as soon as the page loads. So this is kind of like our DOM content loaded event happening. Once the database is ready, instead of the DOM being ready, we're going to get all the data and build a list. So now that we have that working, let's change this so that we can select one of these things. Let's say I want to get to the point where I could edit this. So I'm going to click on one of these, and this is the reason why inside of here in the list items we were adding, down here, there's our W list. Inside of each one of these list items, the reason I was adding those IDs is so I can use them to select a specific record, because these are the unique values, the unique IDs for each one of the items. So when I click on one of these list items, what I want to do is I want to get that data key and then run a get operation on the database so that I can populate this form with whatever the values are. Okay, so let's jump down to the bottom here. We'll add another listener. We've got our build list. We'll come down below that build list, and I'm going to listen for a click on that W list. double check that. Oh, it's a class wlist. So I have to say query selector. There we go. And listening for a click anywhere on this. Okay, so the person clicks anywhere inside of the UL. Could be on any one of the list items. When they click, I'm going to grab the target, which is going to be the list item, and I'm going to ask for its data key property. There we go. This is going to get us that data key value right here, and then this string is what we're going to use to run the get. So, want to do a request? First of all, we have to create the transaction. Again, we're going to do read only because we're not editing the data, we're just going to read the data. We'll add our on complete. So what do we want to do when we have this? So there's our store. This is the one that we want to work with within our transaction. And here, this would be where we provide a key. So I'm doing get. This means I want one record. getAll will provide an array to us. Get is only going to give us one object back. So what is the key that we want to put in? Well, it was this ID. I called it ID here. I can call it ID here, or I can call them both key. It's not going to make much of a difference. We need to, on our request, have our success and our error handler. Always want to add the error handler. And again, we can choose. Do we want to, after the get, run it on the success or the transaction complete? Either one. I'm going to just put it inside of the success for the moment. So same as we had before, request is going to be the ev.request. That is the request object that we're working with, and then the result is going to be our object. Now this is going to be just a single object, remember, not an array. So to save a little bit of time, I'm just going to copy and paste the lines here. These are the values that we're getting. We've got the name, the country, the age, the owned, and we're going to put those into the form that's on the page. And our last thing, the data key, we're going to put this into the form as well, and that in the future is going to let us know if we're updating it. So if this data key attribute exists and it has a value inside of it, we know that we've just put the data inside there. So if somebody clicks the update button, we know that we're going to be making an update. All right, so let's test this out. We'll save. There we go. Jump back in here. And now I should be able to, at this point, click on one of these. Oh, didn't like our key here, so I'm going to jump back and let's take a look to see what we got in here. So a console log, check out that we are actually getting the list item and the ID. Okay, so we're getting the span. Yes. Okay, that makes sense to me. When we're building this series of list items, if we look in the elements here, we've got the span, and there's some text, and then the list items around here. So if I click on the span, this is going to be the target of what I clicked. If I click outside the span, if I clicked on this piece of text, then it would have worked. So when we say target, what we're going to use is the method called closest. And what that's going to do is it's going to walk up through the tree. It's going to look at the HTML, and I'm going to find the thing that's closest to me that has some CSS property. So I'm going to say, find the thing that has the data key attribute. That's the CSS selector for attribute with the square brackets. Find the closest thing to it. So now li should be this. So if I click on the number, we get it. If I click on the span, we get it as well. And I've got another mistake on line 114. Oh yeah, this should be ev.target. There we go. That is the request, and then the result is inside of that. So we could just say that whiskey is equal to ev.target.result. That works too. Okay, try it again. And there we have it. So as we click on the different elements, whether we click on the number or we click on the name, this should always work to give us the correct data so that it populates our form. All right, so if you have any questions about that, please feel free to leave those in the comments down below. I'll answer as many as I have time for. Next video is going to be on the add versus the put operation. So if you're used to relational databases, it's sort of the insert versus update of data. And we'll also get into the delete at the same time. Okay, so I hope that helps you out. Hope that helps you understand a little bit more about transactions and requests, working with the records, putting them in, getting them out. And as always, thanks for watching.